Since the start of Overwatch 2, I've been consistently coaching clients every single week, but I'm starting to see very common patterns in the mistakes that people are making, the same ones over and over again. But once these mistakes are pointed out and removed, I've seen students climb like never before. So we're going to break down the 10 biggest mistakes that I see as an Overwatch 2 coach. But if you want some specialized coaching or to become a long-term student, I have a few more slots in my Patreon where the links will be in the description down below. But let's get into it. Now, we're going to start off with some simple ones and move on to the more advanced concepts that people are getting wrong. First off is just disciplined position. Every single action that you are doing, there's almost always a slightly better area or position you could hold that allow you to do the job the same, but be slightly better protected. Every single wall, cover, corner should be only a step away, and if you can actually deal damage, heal, or take space around these pieces of cover, it really gives you the one thing that everyone needs more of in their games, which is options. You have the option to deny line of sight to the enemy team. You have the option to not take damage while you wait for your cooldowns to come back. You have the option to run away. This is what cover brings you. The more cover you play around, the more options you have. And if you think about the game this way, oftentimes you're going to be moving from one corner or one cover or one wall to the next, and every time you take space or retreat, you're retreating from cover to cover. And the more you start to actively apply this, the better you'll be at passively applying it just by moving around the map. And if you ever go watch a pro or a top ranked player, you'll see that they are automatically playing these positions just by navigating around the map normally. Next off is effective range, and this is where you really need to know the heroes that you're playing. Every single hero has ranges that they play good at and ranges that they're not very effective at, and you need to not only know those ranges, but where there's a differential between the enemy team or enemy character's effective range. Of course, Widowmaker wants to keep her range, so she's very uncomfortable if you're a Tracer that is really close to her. So a lot of the game is, as a Widowmaker player, trying to get value against the Tracer before she gets into your range, and as the Tracer player, trying to navigate around the map to get close to the Widow so that you can play in yours. Now, if you realize that this is the battle at play, then as a Widow, you need to make sure that you're extra careful of the characters that are trying to break into their effective range and outside of yours, and you're making an active effort to constantly be maxing out that range whenever possible and keeping tabs on these characters at all times. This is also extremely true for tank matchups, where some tanks, like a Rein, want to find a way to get in close, and some tanks, like a Sigma, want to maintain their range. And when you're in your range, make sure that you're conserving your cooldowns to deny the enemy player from getting into theirs. So a Sigma wastes rock, all of a sudden, a Ramattra pops Nemesis and runs at you, or a Rein pins at you, and you can't stop it because you use rock randomly when you were in the better range. Or you're an Ana that throws a nade across the map, and then the Winston jumps on you, and you don't have your nade to protect you. When the Winston's far away, he's not a threat. So you got to understand that effective range affects all matchups, and it's very important to understand the discrepancy between your character and the characters that you're most worried about. Next up, and this is a really big mistake that I see so much that is costing you games, and it's using abilities in the pre-fight. Pre-fight shout, pre-fight bubble, nade, Suzu, all your blinks, the list goes on and on. And all this really is using your abilities before the team fight starts, where your team and the enemy team are all going at it, trading health, abilities, healing, damage, all that. That's what's happening, but you use your ability early. And this happens for a couple of reasons. One is a lack of disciplined positioning, which ties back into the first one, the first tip that we have for you. The second one is getting too far ahead of your team or starting a fight without them. This often happens with DPS players and tank players. You shoot to the front of the pack, you're already in, you're already engaging, and then you have to use something like a Winston bubble, but that wasn't added with the pressure of your team, so it's not going to get any extra value, and then you traded a really important cooldown for no cooldowns of the enemy. So now that your team is ready to go in, you don't have it, or maybe you get it back, but you could have used the first bubble to bait out precious cooldowns from the enemy team. You gotta understand that if you're not fully committed to the fight and you're at a safe distance near cover, you don't need to be using your cooldowns. You want to save those because you need those for the optimal time once the team fight is actually started. And if you're putting yourself in positions that force you to use your cooldowns too early, and then there's a mishmash when your team is going in and you have your cooldowns to fight, that's going to cost you a lot of team fights and a lot of games. So it's a really important tip that I want you to take to heart. Now, next up, and this is another big one that I see, and this is the one I see the most where people acknowledge they have this problem, but they aren't fixing it, and it's terrible movement, primarily centered around jumping. Everyone loves to jump. They love to jump around like a goddamn bunny, and this is the problem. Go look at any Hanzo or Widowmaker montage you've ever seen, and there's just jumping people all over the place. Why? It puts you in a fixed position, and it's super easy to headshot you when you're in that fixed position. So instead, I want your feet to be glued to the floor. And there's a couple of things that are just kind of busted in Overwatch that you should be abusing with your movement. First off is just AD spamming, which is going left, right if you're on console. And this is just super, super powerful because a lot of games have a delay. When you try to go from left to right and right to left, there's a small delay in between going or changing directions. Not in Overwatch. It's instantaneous, which means that oftentimes, you're moving so fast that an enemy would not be able to shoot you when you just change directions on a dime. They can only hit you when you're in a fixed movement. So spamming AD or moving to the left, to the right really quickly makes you really freaking hard to kill. And then add to that crouching, which also has no delay and is unlimited. So you combine this, moving left and right very quickly, to crouching very, very fast, and your head is moving like crazy, your body is moving like crazy, and it just makes you so hard to kill. Don't give all these things up for a very simple floaty headshot. And while you might not be getting punished consistently with this bad movement right now, as you start to improve and climb, you're gonna hit a wall where the mechanical skill of the players that you're up against is gonna be able to punish your bad movement if you don't correct this mistake right now. Now, the next big mistake is submitting yourself to risk for no reason. A lot of players ask me whether or not they should be afraid of a certain player's value. Like, should they respect a player? Should they ever challenge a Widow or a Hanzo? What amount of respect should they give to people, especially if they're not in the highest ranks to play? They believe that they can kind of cut out all forms of respect because they're not against good players in their mind, and they can just challenge everybody and beat them, and that's how they climb. And here's the thing, there is some merit to not giving people respect that don't deserve it. However, this doesn't mean that you're not playing discipline. It's important that you don't give a person zero respect if it doesn't actually create an advantage for you. Challenging a Widowmaker from close range and trying to fight them. Maybe you're a freaking Ana, or maybe you're a freaking Moira or anything, and you're trying to challenge a Widowmaker, and you don't respect this Widowmaker to hit a hard shot, and if they don't, you're gonna actually kill them. I say go for it, but not respecting a Widowmaker when you're super far away, not actually applying any pressure to the enemy Widow, and you could easily just be behind a piece of cover and still do all the stuff you're doing, like healing your team, or even applying pressure to the enemy tank without peeking a Widow that's across the map that you have no impact over. At the end of the day, you still need to be playing around the character. That doesn't necessarily you need to be respecting the person, but don't throw all respect out the window, because then maybe 1 out of 10 games or 2 out of 10 games, you're gonna die. And then as you climb, you're gonna have bad habits, and you're gonna die a lot more often, and you're gonna hit a brick wall. And what are you not giving this person respect for if there's no value for you to be gained by doing that in the first place in this scenario? Basically, you're always balancing risk versus reward, but don't increase your risk for no increase in reward. Now, the 6th tip, and this is one that is costing so many people games, and it's just crazy. Even grandmasters do this, and it's absolutely ballistic. And it's speeding up too fast when you have an advantage. And you might be like, huh? Aren't you supposed to push when you have picks? Isn't that like coaching 101? And yes, to an extent, you should be pushing when you have advantage, but you need to be careful. This is what always happens. Let's say you're in a team fight, 5v5, 2 people die on the enemy team, but guess what? Your team has no cooldowns, your team are all low, very, very low, and instead of giving yourself what I would call a wellness check, making sure that you get your health back, making sure you get your cooldowns back, and then pushing the enemy team as a 5 team that has more numbers than the enemy team, more cooldowns, more health, you can actually easily win by fighting that if you are all in a decent health state. You push in when your tank is 1 HP, you don't have any of your cooldowns, your DPS are low, and what always happens is you just get traded out like crazy. And I've seen so many teams throw a crazy advantage. They got 2 kills. It should have been in the bag, but they pushed too far too fast. And I'm not telling you to not push, but make sure that your team is stable, your core is stable. Just because all of you are alive doesn't mean that y'all aren't broken and battered. Sometimes you only need 5-10 seconds. Get that wellness check, then push. So you don't put yourself in a situation where you won on paper, but then lose because you went a little bit too far ahead of your team's natural advantages. Now, the 7th one is a lack of mental, or giving up far too early. And I think this ties into a couple of reasons why people book coaching in the first place. There are some small percentage of people that get coaching that want to be proved right that they deserve a higher rank, right? They believe that it's their team's fault that they are in a certain rank. They want to get coaching to get that validation. And for the most part, I've seen players perform really well or perform higher than the average for their rank, and maybe they do quote unquote deserve a higher rank. But what does that even mean? And why are you trying so desperately to prove that you deserve it? At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that you are improving and you are focusing on your own impact. And this is the one way that I've seen hundreds of people improve and climb. So many people have climbed all the way to Grandmaster and beyond. Both in Overwatch 1 and in Overwatch 2, I've coached players to Grandmaster. And every single time, once they finally get there, they realize that a big part of the problem was their mindset. They focused way too much on the people around them. They focused way too much on how things should be. I need to have this counter, or things need to be optimized in this way, and not enough about the things that they could control. They would give up too early when things didn't perfectly align with their knowledge of the game. And this is the thing you need to understand. There is no deserve of anything. There is only get or not get. There is only have or not have. And that's all that matters. And the only way to get there is to get better. That's it. You need to get rid of your mistakes. You need to perform better in your games. And that's how you will eventually climb. And I promise you, there will be games that you carry every single teammate, every single one of them on your team. There will be sometimes many games that you perform really, really well and you still lose. But at the end of the day, if you keep improving, if you keep getting better, I promise you, you will climb. And that is the most important lesson I can teach anyone. And honestly, it was the #1 thing that held me back way back when I could not improve in Overwatch. Now, the last 3 are going to be mistakes that I see for each of the roles: support, tank, and DPS. Now, the biggest mistake that I see with support is just overhealing. And I think this really carries over from Overwatch 1, where players are just healing way too much. They're healing like 90% of the time, maybe 95%, and doing damage and doing damage-based abilities like 5% of the time, when this number should be 50-50 at best, and sometimes even far more in the damage side of things. And this doesn't mean that you should never heal, but healing is only a tiny bit of your value on support, and you can do so much more. Every single support has powerful utility, some of the most powerful utility in the game, and they also have crazy amounts of damage potential, besides Lifeweaver, that can actually just destroy the enemy. And if you sacrifice all that for just the healing part of your kit, you're just leaving so much of it behind. Now, I know what you might be saying. You're saying that your team needs heals. Your team are inting. They're all taking so much damage. If you don't heal, then they will all die. And the problem is, if you start with an overhealing playstyle, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your teammates start to play around a really, really huge amount of heals. They start to int in ways that they never would before, relying on you, and you put yourself in a pit where your only value is going to come from just pocketing your team, who aren't really doing enough to win the fight. Sometimes it's in your best interest to just play your game in the way that you are going to play it and have your team play around you, not give them or coddle them and give them everything they want. And another part of this is going directly with toxicity. A lot of times support players will tell me they get flamed if they do too much damage or go for aggressive plays or use aggressive abilities instead of just healing. And the thing is, your teammates just want you to give all your resources to them, right? But that's not how you're going to win. It doesn't matter what they say. I don't care if you have to mute every single freaking one of them. They do not know what you should be doing to win. If they did, they would not be in the rank that they are. And even if they were in a higher rank, they are not playing your main. Like, you need to be playing to what gets you the win, and you need to be playing in the way that has your impact exemplified. Don't just give in to what your teammates want you to do all the time, and don't just coddle them by giving them all the healing that you have while keeping all the really valuable, impactful stuff you can do off the table. Now moving on to number 9, and this is super important for you tank players to understand. You set the pace of every single fight. You decide when a fight starts, and winning team fights is the most important thing, and a tank decides when a fight is forced, when it's delayed, or when it's something that you retreat from. And this is really important because as a tank, you need to be balancing or tracking what the numbers advantage of each team is. As you have advantage, you need to make sure that once people are good to go, once people are healthy, you're pressing that advantage and you're taking space appropriate to that advantage. When you have a disadvantage, you're giving up space, you're backing up, you're delaying the fight because you are not strong enough to force it. And a tank that forces a fight when their team is weak is a tank that leads their team straight to death. This is super, super important, and that's why tank is a role that requires high game sense or understanding of the battle as it progresses, of the advantages of both teams. And also, I would say knowing your matchups is one of the most important things you can do on tank. Knowing what range you should play at, knowing how and what you should do against every single tank. If you're a tank main, you need to be dedicated to learning the matchups of your main. Of course, I have a lot of guides on many of the tanks, and there's many guides online that you can look at, but if you have extra questions, let me know in the comments down below. But last, but certainly not least, we have DPS. And a DPS's job is not to purely output damage, and it's not to purely get kills. Oftentimes, the most underrated or the biggest mistake that DPS players make is they don't recognize the value of forcing people off angles. Oftentimes, if there's a Hanzo that peeks your high ground, you just have to do enough damage to get him off that angle. You don't necessarily need to kill every single person that exists. In fact, overcommitting to people, challenging people, is sometimes kind of playing into what they want you to do. Like, let's say a DPS peeks an off angle or a high ground or whatever. You do a little bit of damage to that person, they run away. Now you're back to doing your own thing, and the entire time they're running away, they have to go reset, they have to get heals from their teammates, then they have to get back into an off angle position and re-challenge, and the entire time you are being effective. So they wasted, what, 20 seconds, 15 seconds of downtime for what took you 2 seconds to contest them. Now, if you do 2 damage to them, they start running away, you chase after them, you chase them all the way around the map, they get heals, they come back, they kill you, you wasted all that time. Maybe you even kill them, but you get traded out, or maybe you just go on a wild goose chase for the entire time because you're so obsessed with trying to get the kill or chase the kill, you didn't realize that you already got the value. Just by forcing them off that angle, forcing them to retreat, you already got the most important piece of value. Don't allow them to get value from you in a futile effort to try to kill them. I would say this really comes down to understanding what the win condition of a fight is, and also as DPS, realizing once you have an advantage, what are the ways in which you could lose that advantage. If there's threats on the table that your team should be scared of, it could be your job to shut those threats down. For example, maybe you're up 2 kills, but the enemy Widow still has a good angle. It could be your job to deny that angle because that person is the one person on the battlefield that could turn the fight. Or maybe you know that a certain character has an ult or ult combo. Those are people that you pressure out and focus first. Understanding that win condition is very important for DPS players because they can have a more surgical targeted effect on that win condition than the other 2 roles. Anyways, these are the top 10 mistakes that I have seen as an Overwatch coach. But if these aren't your mistakes, you can definitely book a private coaching session with me in the links down below. But thanks so much for coming by. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.